Catch up on all the live shows right here on africatechradio.com.
An estimated 494, that's almost 500 million people in Sub-Saharan Africa have no form of legal identification. In response, policymakers across Sub-Saharan Africa are increasingly investing in a particular digital technology with transformative potential: biometric digital identification systems. Digitizing ID systems has the potential to increase access to universally valid proof of identity, which is often very essential and important for citizens to access basic government services and lead a dignified life. However, these systems could also lead to exclusion or an undermining of privacy. African governments, local large corporations, tech companies seem to be embracing a certain Western vision of a universal identity system too. And with the support from World Bank's Identification for Development ID4D program, governments across Africa have, I choose my words, quite well here when I say foisted, elaborate and expensive biometric ID schemes on citizens and residents with little pushback from civil society. Now, as governments across Africa introduce elaborate and sometimes expensive biometric ID schemes on residents, and we have more startups introducing solutions that are tied to these ID systems, what trends shape the sector in Africa in 2022? From accessing mobile money to public health services and promoting financial inclusion, digital identity or ID systems can provide individuals with life-enhancing services and benefits while becoming active participants in a digital economy, which most countries on the continent of Africa are trying to get to achieve. Now, despite all of these things we have said, like I've highlighted, half of the estimated billion people worldwide who have no form of legal identification reside in Africa. And advocacy groups have also highlighted some human rights issues that we may not be paying attention to. So today, we will look at the trends that have shaped the ID system, KYC, digital, biometric ID systems in Africa in 2022. And to discuss these issues and the trends with me is Ademola Koledoye, right? Or Koledoye. So I need to get the right pronunciation from Ademola. Ademola leads marketing and communications at Seamfix. Ademola, please help me, please. How do I say your name correctly?
Hi, good morning.
Hi.
Thanks, Anthony. Anthony Ide.
Yeah.
I'm sure I pronounced it as well. Yes, you were correct the last time. My name is Ademola Koledoye.
Okay, so Koledoye. Okay, so I don't say something else because I know our names are really important and they mean a lot to us, and they talk about our experiences and they tell our stories really well, so that I don't change the story or the narrative here. Okay, so thank you for that. Yeah. And I also have with me Ilerioluwa Fadeyi, who's a lead infrastructure engineer at Prembly. Ilerioluwa, how are you doing today?
Good day. I'm doing very good.
I hope
you got my name correct.
Oh, yes. I was about to ask that. Thank you very much for saving me. Yeah. So,
sure.
How has this year been for you as someone who works with a startup, a firm that is within the digital and biometric ID sector in Africa? Ilerioluwa and then Ademola.
Okay. Well, it's been a very eye-opening year for us and a very explosive year in terms of integration and usage. Right. What you find is you have a lot of use cases for our ID systems in Africa. However, you also have the problem of enrollment in those ID systems, getting those data before it can be used by the ID systems. So yeah, it's been a very explosive year in terms of gathering this data, getting our data sources right directly from the government, and also having people gain interest in using these systems.
Ademola, what do you think? How has it been at your own end?
All right, thanks, Anthony. So for us, it's been an interesting year. This is December 2022 already, so we're already at the end of the year. And for us at Seamfix, though we're not entirely new in the identity conversation, I would say this year has exposed a lot of, we've come to the realization how much a lot of companies, businesses, government institutions are paying attention to identity, right? So we've seen an explosion of, even in the startup ecosystem, a lot of people, coming up to pilot or pioneer one app or the other, where they have to, of course, rely on identity and KYC and all. So for us, it's been an interesting thing because we've seen how people have become more aware over the years. Okay, so pre-COVID, you would agree with me that they had less people, talking about identity and KYC and so on and so forth, digital economies, So, but we've seen the adoption and even the awareness about identity grow over the years. So that's just what it is for us at Seamfix this year.
Okay, and you have already started touching on like the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is the state of ID systems in Africa. So how would you rate ID systems when it comes to adoption, when it comes to regulation, when it comes to the number of startups playing, and awareness generally about ID systems in Africa?
Okay. Right. So, like I mentioned earlier, if you look at the entire global landscape of, identification, right, you would agree with me that it's actually changing rapidly. As I also mentioned, pre-COVID, there are conversations around, identification, and all that. But so far, so good. It's become a very, 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 very rapid change. Now, in Africa, I would say that today technology is somehow making it cheaper to, of course, identify people accurately. And the reason why technology has, come into play that role is that, Africa is beginning to realize, the importance of digital identities, right? Basing on the fact that, on the idea, which somehow we uphold in Seamfix, that everybody deserves access, to equal rights and opportunities, okay? And also that identity is a right and not a privilege. So when everyone is somehow identified, that means there's an opportunity for them to, have access to services across the world. So in Africa today, I would say that entire conversation is growing rapidly. And the use of technology so far has even, somehow made it even cheaper to identify people. And of course, opportunities in this digital era is limitless when identity is involved in the conversation. So like I said, once you're able to be identified, you can have access to opportunities. And then in terms of stats, we can see what the World Bank is trying to do. With their ID4D program, and I'm sure we probably will touch on that sometime in the conversation. But we have stats saying about more than 40% of those lacking IDs in the world live in Africa. So that's data. So that's something you can reference and say that's the state of identification system in Africa. So we still have about 40% of people in the world who cannot be identified living in Africa. And if you put that in terms of raw numbers, with over 7 billion people in the world, 40% of that is quite a lot. So, yeah.
Okay, interesting take. Ilerioluwa, what do you think about the state of ID systems in Africa? And maybe you want to tie this to the kind of trends that you noticed in 2022 as it relates to, adoption, as it relates to, growing number of startups and conversations around it, regulation, and any other thing you noticed or may have noticed that, is worth, talking about?
Okay. So yeah, for me, I actually agree with Ademola when it comes to the way identification has changed or grown rapidly across the world, not just in Africa, but in Africa especially. Right, so you have an economy that is moving to the digital age. Right, a lot of things that we do are done digitally now, and the need for identification or proper identification systems has grown alongside it. Right, so whereby we have a situation where we don't necessarily have people enrolling as fast as it should, or people on the system, like I just mentioned, 40% of the people that are not registered or do not have an ID system are living in Africa, right? Where you have the situations like that, we also have situations whereby in Nigeria, for example, a regulation that was passed, the tying your NIN to your phone number, we've had to, those kind of things have forced people to adopt or have made people buy into the system. If you have a SIM card and you do not register for NIN, your SIM will be blocked. That has seen over 20 million people actually enroll in this identification system. So yeah, I'd say where it was, the numbers don't look good, where it is 40%, numbers don't look good in that direction. There are certain countries or certain parts of Africa that have regulations that push them in the right direction. Obviously, over time, we will need to still keep. Well, it's not where it should be. It's not where it should be at all. That's what I'll say.
Okay, so some persons have had advocacy groups, rights, civil rights groups and societies have had some thoughts about how these biometric ID systems are being implemented. For example, the example you just gave, forcing people to actually adopt these get on the train, right, of the new biometric or digital ID systems. What are your thoughts about it? Do you think there's a better way to encourage people to actually get on it than forcing people? The same thing is, as we speak, this is December 2022, some lines are being blocked in Ghana. Earlier this year we had the same story in Nigeria. Should it be this way, or is there a better way to go about encouraging or transitioning people to the biometric ID systems? That's Ilerioluwa. Then Ademola, you can also share your thoughts on that.
Is there a better way? Yes. I think what we should firstly focus on, right, as a nation, as Africans, right, the first thing we should focus on is solving the issues that plague ID systems. We know things like exclusion, things like infrastructure, things like even the weak civil registration system, right, would affect the development of an ID system. Now, the problem is, have we properly tackled that? If we have, then I think the next level is tackling the next literacy, right? Not everybody knows what these things are about. Not everybody knows that they should do certain things, or these things are beneficial to them. So I think the next level then is now getting them enlightened, letting them know about it, spreading awareness, right? Then you now come from a regulation perspective. I think what it is that we basically skipped some of these steps, right, and went straight to regulation. I think the first thing we should have done was tackle the online learning problem, challenges that face the industry in Africa, which are still vast and extensive, right? Then you can now educate people as to how and what this data is used for and how it benefits them. Then you can now use regulations, because whether we like it or not, everybody needs to enroll, everybody needs to be on an ID system. You have countries that you don't even have all their birth registered. In certain countries in Africa, you have about 60% of children under the age of 5 are not registered. Their births are not registered, right? And the number for death is even higher. The percentage for death is even higher. And when you have things like that, it's like a person has never existed. How is the person supposed to be on an ID system? Because she was never born. So I guess I think those are the things that we need to tackle first. Face the challenges that are right in front of you, right? Then you can now start to win people over to enrolling on these systems.
Okay. This is interesting because I just wanted to ask, when you mentioned challenges, I wanted to say, okay, so what are the challenges that we actually face? But I think you've highlighted some of them here, and I would give Ademola a chance to share his thoughts too on this. So, Ademola, are we going about it the right way? Are we implementing these, things the right way? And also, what challenges do you think the industry faced in 2022, or what carryover challenges have we brought from the years before into 2022? Ademola.
I agree completely with on what the points that he raised. We actually somehow, skipped a lot of processes and just jumped into regulation, without tackling some very fundamental things. Just mentioned literacy as well. So, but in my own words, I like to put it this way: one of the major things around identity is building trust, right? Building trust. So when people are properly identified, they are able to be trusted for transactions and so on and so forth. Well, let me bring a twist to the building trust thing. I'll use Nigeria as a case study. The idea of even having people enrolled into a foundational database for a country like Nigeria, there's a lot of work that needs to happen from the government to actually make people trust that, hey, this is actually a sincere move, right? If you look at what happened recently just with the NIN enrollment that Ilerioluwa highlighted, there are a lot of people who, were having doubts, about the idea of trying to get them to tie their name to their SIM cards, right? But so I think the very first thing in terms of that literacy, with that challenge that we have in Africa, is to get the people to trust that the intentions for having you enrolled into a foundational database is genuine, is sincere, right? And I'll also add that, without having to bring in the political conversation around having a truly, comprehensive and I would use the word sincere database, right? Sincere foundational database, where the government is able to tell that, hey, these are the correct citizens of our country. It will definitely expose a lot of things like the areas in the country that have the population distribution and so on and so forth, right? So the government in itself, Africa government, I'll use Nigeria as a case study, has that role to play to, first of all, be sincere enough to wanting to get the foundational database correct, all right? Then invest a lot in that literacy gap, to build trust, to actually make people understand that, hey, this thing is actually for your own good. Then we now talk about when this happens, that trust between the people and the government entirely builds the main trust that we're talking about, that will now avoid fraud and so on and so forth. Then moving over to challenges that we looked at here in 2022. In fact, that's a carryover. For Nigeria particularly, I would say we have a lot of identity databases, right? We've not gotten it right from so many years ago, where we probably started exploring functional databases like driver's license, voters registration, BVN, immigration. All these things are functional databases that have existed maybe before the NIN. I'm not quite sure now, but along the line, NIN just became which is the foundational database of the country. And if we had invested before now our time in building a correct foundational database, then we wouldn't need investing in all those other functional databases. So you would see the effect of this across board. For example, if you go to these different organizations like the immigration office or the driver's license office, you would see that they are now making efforts, right, to tie those functional databases to the foundational one, which is NIN. So you can't get your passport now without an NIN, and all that. So some of these things that are happening now were actually things that we should have fixed way before now, invest the entire infrastructure of identity management in that foundational database, NIM. So just like Ilerioluwa spoke, if we do what we're supposed to do first, build the literacy, then some of these challenges in terms of people now, rushing down to a particular center to, enroll their name because there's a deadline for blocking their SIM cards, and all those regulation pressure wouldn't actually be there if there's something gradual that has been, put in place to actually tackle this problem.
Okay, that's really interesting. Now, I would just want to stay on some of these challenges just a little bit longer. You've both mentioned the challenge of trust, which is one of the big issues since the news have been making the round from Tanzania to Nigeria to Ghana to Kenya. Trust has been, and I want to take this from two angles, and I want you to also share your thoughts on this. Privacy, first of all. A lot of people think or believe that if everyone jumps on this train, we do not have cover for privacy yet. And we want to put everyone into, this whole new ID system, but we don't have a lot. Maybe we don't even have like proper coverage for privacy, or have fully, thought about how we want to protect, people's privacy when, and their rights to when they are on these ID systems. And the second one, is the ownership of the infrastructure itself, because I think either those who are funding it, which is Western, and those who are providing some of the major original infrastructure that these systems are built upon, kind of have like a Western leaning. Some people are afraid of the term digital colonialism, when it looks like someone else has like all the technology, where all our information is on, or where we're building the platform for our own information. So how would you respond to maybe these two issues, or what are your thoughts around these two issues?
All right. So first, I think I'll mention. Yes, I agree with you 100%. The trust thing. And speaking a bit technical, I'm sure Ilerioluwa would agree with me. What kind of infrastructure that we have in place, for example, in Nigeria, and I'm sure for other parts of African country, there are policies in place where the data, identity data, somehow is not actually hosted outside your country, right? So for Nigeria today, I'm sure the infrastructure that holds, in fact, for any country at all, you would not put your country's foundational database information on the cloud, right? Cloud server or something. It somehow has to sit, within your on-premise or in your country, or a cloud system in your own country, right? This somehow ensures that, hey, that privacy, the privacy concerns with, dealing with people from the West is somehow addressed. Now, secondly, there's the second layer of, what we've also been exploring here at Seamfix, which is something around consent management, right? So, in as much as, hey, I have my data or my identity data, sitting somewhere, I should somehow have the right to give consent to how it should be used or not. In some other places in the West, these things have also been put in place, to encourage or to solidify the conversations around trust, right? So if there's this kind of, implementation on ground, then just like we said before, the government is responsible for, bridging the literacy gap, where you are able to educate people and tell them, see, hey, your identity data, this is what it is used for, or this is how it's beneficial to you. In terms of infrastructure wise, it sits within, this premise, it doesn't leave the country. And if there's also some level of consent management, it also would encourage more people to know that, hey, I can trust that my data won't be compromised. And I think lastly, before I let Ilerioluwa speak on this a bit, would be that I think for us here in Africa, we're still even at the layer of even getting the database in order, getting it together, right? While yes, privacy to the data and all that is a concern, I feel like a lot of work still needs to be done, even to get people into the digital ID system first, right? Now, this is by, for example, the recent NIN drive that the government did. So before this year, or I think before 2021, 2022, you could only enroll for NIN in like some physical locations like banks, local government headquarters, and so on and so forth. It wasn't even available. The technology or infrastructure wasn't even available across board, to be able to enroll for NIN, right? But recently you can see that ability or capability have been extended, where the government has now invested in partnering with people, private sector companies like Seamfix, to invest in like having NIN enrollment on Android devices, right? And also bringing in partners and agents like telecommunication companies. You can practically enroll for NIN anywhere you do your SIM registration today, right? So I think that drive or that effort is something that at the end of the day, the exercise will, get more people digitally included, and then we can now start addressing the issue of, the privacy and the consent to the data.
Data is life. Data is king now. Ilerioluwa, what do you think?
So yes, I think Ademola touched on very, very important points, right? When you look at it, you talk about the privacy of the data, but what if you don't even have the data, right? That's the first question. If you don't have people enrolled on these systems, then privacy part of things is even dead before it even starts to fly, right? Then in terms of privacy, as Ademola has also mentioned, you have regulations that actually surround and put or guard our data, right? You don't want a situation, as a company and a startup, you would have to be in line with those regulations to function, right? So companies like, myself, Prembly, right? We have guidelines or rules that we must not break. For example, we don't actually even store data, right, in our own database. We are directly connected to the government's database, and that's how the verification is processed through the government, not on our own database, that kind of thing. So you have rules and you have policies that actually keep us or keep these kind of institutions in line, which should build a level of trust with the citizens of the country that decide to use these identification systems, right? So I think when those regulations are already in place, so when you want to look at the bigger picture is now, how do we now get these people to know that these regulations are in place and to enroll, right, to feel safe, and which is where I would say raising awareness, not just dropping back-to-back regulations. I know the NIN regulation, the enrollment that they did recently, the regulation they passed recently actually worked, because NIN was created in 2007, and the biggest rise in its adoption was in 2021 when they made it compulsory. But while we have things like that, I think the first thing is educating people, letting people know, like now having this kind of talk shows, letting them know that yes, your data is safe and it would be used how you want it to be used, right? By the companies you want it to be used. Like, for example, you want to take a loan, obviously you need to provide the data. You would consent to something like that. However, you might not want to use your data for certain other things. So it's just, for me, I think the primary focus should be actually getting people to understand that your data is safe, because these regulations are there for there's no startup or organization that is creating an ID system that does not understand or know about the regulations. And if you're in breach of those regulations, you cannot run those startups. So yeah.
Okay, so let's stay on regulations for a bit. regulations, you operate in Nigeria, for example, and maybe across, some other countries. What regulations in 2022 have, would you say thumbs up to? Which of the regulations would you say, maybe not managed very well or not implemented very well? So let's just have a highlight of the regulation space from, a company or a firm, and a startup that's dealing in this industry.
I would say thumbs up to the NIMC, NIN, SIM card linking regulation. And I would also say, could have been done better, right? The reason for saying that is the thumbs up is because there was a spike in adoption the moment that was done. Everybody wanted to get themselves enrolled. The moment those policies were passed, saying, oh yeah, you cannot do anything without having an NIN, you can't even get your passport, you can't. It made people want to get those things. But why I would also say, it could have been done better is because it was more like people's hands were forced rather than a thing of choice, right? I believe it could have been done better if we had a merger of regulation and education, right? Enlightening people. If we had that, then that would have been a flawless regulation to have passed. But we didn't. We just had one part of it, and as a human being, you don't want to have to be forced to do something. Yes, there's certain people that understand these things and it was easy for them to accept, but there are people also that don't understand it and could not accept them in. So that's
okay. Ademola, Ademola, what are your thoughts?
I mean, he touched on almost everything already, right? Before I mention the latest regulation that just dropped some couple of weeks ago, I would agree with the fact that yes, the regulation drive is more like forcing people to adopt that rather than them willingly, having seen that, hey, this thing is going to be beneficial to me, jump on it. But at the same time, I can cut the government some slack. This country that we live in, Nigeria, is pretty a difficult one. People most likely will not, willingly just, on their own jump on something like this until they are forced to, and that is actually a fundamental problem in terms of literacy, right? So we have more uneducated people in the country, right, than educated people. So that alone is a challenge. If we are just three right now speaking and discussing on benefits of why we need to do this or that, at least there's you can assume that at least we'll come to a compromise to understand why we need to do this, right? But when you're talking to someone that's uneducated, there are chances that most likely they are going to interpret some other thing. I'll give you an example. Recently, in the ongoing exercise for voters' PVC collection, I saw somewhere, I think some couple of days ago, like a protest or a revolt that people went to pick up their PVCs and they were asked to thumbprint. That was what I read. And, there was just a lot of fuss and, talk around it. But in my own interpretation, I just started thinking, or rather in my own understanding, I'm like, maybe the fingerprint that they're asking you to put down is probably to verify that is the real owner of the PVC that is collecting it, right? And for some of the people there, I'm not quite sure, but if I was there, I'll probably not start screaming on top of my voice. I probably want to find out from the person. I would engage the person who is asking me to do this. I want to understand whether is this a verification process to verify that I'm actually the owner of the PVC. So you would see that education gap where any small thing, any proposition from the government is suspicious. It's looking like, hey, it's against the masses. One of the regulations I would also refer to is the most recent one that happened with the boarding of the Abuja-Kaduna train. You can see that happened. I think everyone now has to have an NIN before you can even board the train. And this is coming from in the insecurity challenge that the country is facing, right? So from the incident that happened sometime this year, the government felt like, okay, from now on, we have to implement this. So of course, it's going to be difficult for a lot of people who do not have NIN and will somehow force them, right, to go and get that. So it's a balance. It's a skill between a balancing skill between what they call it, the citizens of the country, trusting and being willingly to adopt this kind of things, which is not a common thing that happens in Nigeria. All right, the government somehow has to always, come out to force people in using a very hard hand, if you permit me to use that for lack of a better word, to approach these things. Yeah.
Because of time and how long this episode is, we decided to break this episode into 2 parts. You have just listened to the first part, and there is a second part with the same name, the same title. In the second part, we get to know if biometric and digital IDs are really solving the issues Africa currently faces, from insecurity to hunger, unemployment, and many more, and also how they have helped service delivery in Africa. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to catch up on all the live shows right here on africatechradio.com.